This podcast features Ms. Tahmina Watson, who is an attorney practicing immigration law. During this interaction, we got to know her views about immigration and the problems associated with a system that badly needs a complete reform. We also got to know about her involvement in community-based activities. Altogether, it was a great conversation. So, it's over to Tahmina and Nanda.
I'm quoting Emma Lazarus here. Give me you're tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses and yearning to be free. From there, we seem to have done a 360 and we now want the brightest and the best to come in. So when did this transition take place and why did it take place?
Oh, such a great question to start with, and I just got goosebumps all over me. And if you go to anybody in this administration, they'll have a different version of that poem. They've actually really tried to literally change the version of that poem. Right. You know, immigration is such a core issue in America. If you are not Native American, you have come to America from an immigrant background, whether you came here through the Mayflower or, you know, the planes from, the other parts of the globe. And what this administration has done is really taken that core message of immigration and turned it on its head, just like you said, 360-degree turn. There is a notion that immigrants are bad for America. The current rhetoric is immigrants are taking away jobs, immigrants are taking welfare, and they are essentially taking the rights away from quote unquote white people. And that rhetoric has done so much damage. And we can talk about it in the form of policy and what's happening on the roads, because they're all absolutely related. From policy, you might remember from like January 2017, when this administration actually got into office, there were a number of executive orders that were signed almost from the get-go, after the rhetoric of immigration throughout the campaign period. And one of them was a travel ban, also known as a Muslim ban. And from that moment onwards, essentially, we've had problems with adverse policies coming in constantly, one executive order after another, whether it's for undocumented immigrants, whether it's for public charge issues, and I'll come and touch that on in a minute, whether it's for high-skilled immigration, they're all having problems. And with that issue, what we see is the law has not changed. I think one of the things that's very important for people to understand, essentially the laws in this country have to be created by Congress, where the House will agree on a bill, both Republicans and the Democrats. That bill will go to the Senate, or vice versa sometimes, where the Republicans and the Democrats will come to an agreement, and that bill will get passed as well. And then that bill goes to the president. There is a process in which laws are created in this country. But for years, we have seen Congress doesn't agree on anything. So this administration has essentially taken advantage of those disagreements and essentially created executive orders, one after another, essentially creating the way policies will be adjudicated, bypassing Congress completely. And as a result, while we see executive orders with vague language, we want the highest and paid and the brightest minds, which was said in an executive order about H-1B visas, when you read that, you don't really know what it means. I remember going on various media channels saying, well, we'll have to see what it means, because that by itself doesn't mean a lot. Because obviously you need to change the laws to define what highest paid means and what brightest minds means. You need a definition. But what we found very quickly is that the government was changing the way in which its policies were being adjudicated on these cases. And suddenly they're looking at wages, they're looking at the degree type in a more scrutinizing way than we've ever seen before. And as a result, we've seen the highest denials in H-1Bs ever. And that has a consequence on everything that's followed. Now, this administration came in with various rhetorical sort of ideas. Number one, they don't want family-based immigration, and they called it chain migration, instantly making it sound bad. They didn't want people taking jobs away, making it sound bad. But without the high-skilled immigrants, would we have, particularly in this pandemic situation, would we have our internet working? Would we have our phones working? Would we have our Netflix working? Would we have any of these technology items that are keeping us actually functioning at a time when we can't even leave our houses? I think the immigrants have an incredible contribution to our everyday life that is not being articulated. It's an invisible hand behind the way we are operating. Even the interview that you and I are doing on Zoom, the founder of it was actually denied his visas over the past several years, of course, one after another before he was given a visa. But it's an immigrant that is allowing you and I to talk today. But this immigrant is allowing our schools to function, our doctors to actually see their patients, and so forth. Immigrants are immensely valuable, invaluable. If you think about the only place we can go, the grocery store, the food that is there, the apples that you are finding on your grocery shelves, they're coming to you because the immigrant chain of events is really helping us have that. They are picking our apples from the farms, they're delivering them on the vans, they are actually putting them in the grocery store shelves. Our day-to-day basic living is happening because we have immigrants in this country. If you look at the healthcare system, that is absolutely under strain at the moment. A large portion of those doctors, nurses, assistants are immigrants. If you look at the Filipino community, a large number of those nurses are from the Filipino community. If you look at the Indian community, the South Asian community, how many doctors do we have that are serving in both in technology but the medical industry?
You're right.
If we didn't have the immigrants, our nation right this moment in history would have fallen apart already. Yet, what has this administration done? Their initial motto of reducing immigrants really came into fruition as the pandemic began. From March to June, they have had a number of policy changes, including executive orders, banning more and more people, but this time banning on visa categories. So they banned parents and siblings from getting green cards until December, and we'll have to see what happens in the election. But quote unquote chain migration has now been accomplished through this. But how? Because the pandemic is taking jobs away. These people are not coming to take jobs away. They're coming here to be with their families. They're coming here to actually make a contribution of their own. They have banned new H-1B visas and J visas. They have banned L visas. The J visa is not a visa that is normally in the news. But if you think about what's happening today, we have childcare problems. We have children who are home. I have 2 children who are 10 and 8. You know, suddenly I'm a parent as well as a professional who's working from home with my children at home. Who's going to teach my children? Often people have J visa au pairs come to the US around about September to help with childcare issues. Suddenly we can't have those immigrants. Yet we have a pandemic where we can't have cross-contamination of an airborne virus that is essentially a pandemic. A bad time to pick on the J visa. You know, it's banned. So what this administration has done is use COVID as a means to their end to actually reduce immigration. One of the biggest things that they have done, I mean, everything is big, nothing is bigger than the other, but one of the big, because the impact is absolutely huge across the board. But one of the things that they did in February, just as the pandemic was hitting the US, they instituted a new law that was created through the rulemaking process, not an executive order. And people will forget that this was an executive order in January 2017. It just wasn't signed. So we already knew it was coming.
Oh,
And I will make sure that you get some of these links. But this particular law, essentially, quote unquote, referred to as public charge. We do not want immigrants to come here to get Social Security benefits. And so this went through a rulemaking process. It went through a lot of litigation, and the litigation hasn't finished. They allowed this rule to go into effect, and that was implemented in February. What has that caused for us? The pandemic happened immediately thereafter. We are now, as immigration lawyers, but also immigrants, in a frenzy. We don't know what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, who's going to be affected. And even this particular law had an injunction. That injunction was lifted 2 weeks ago. For some states, we don't know who needs to file it. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty. But when we are dealing, when we are dealing with uncertainties of children going to school, whether we actually should go to the grocery store to buy our groceries, otherwise we might get the virus ourselves. I mean, we have so much going on, and suddenly the West Coast is on fire. You know, you might have listeners who are in California, in Oregon, in Washington State. I cannot tell you the anxiety that we have here. We were able to go on hikes, and we were able to go to the parks with our kids. Now we're not allowed to do that. We cannot do that. I live in Seattle, Washington. Luckily, there hasn't been a fire in my immediate vicinity, but there's been fires around our area in Eastern Washington. And if anybody pays attention to the news, those fires have blown smoke. The winds have blown those smoke over to our area. We cannot leave the house anymore. We have the worst air quality in the world at the moment. And you know, it's one thing after another, after another, after another. And the immigration problem is just being a nail in the coffin, if you like. A lot of people, you know, I don't know if you heard this from your listeners, Nanda, but a lot of people came here as tourists from India. Our Indians who are living in Dubai, Indians who are living in different countries, South Asian people generally, my background is Bangladeshi. People who've come here as tourists and they can't leave, because the borders had closed wherever they were. And suddenly we have immigration problems for them. Can we file their application? Is it going to be adjudicated? Do we file another one? So it's been a very trying time. So I'm so glad you started the conversation with that poem, because I've not seen anybody else do that.
Yeah, because it's this whole thing, right? The country was founded on this. I mean, it's supposed to be welcoming a shining city on a hill, as President Reagan had once said. Supposed to serve as a beacon for most other nations, but unfortunately, that's not what it is right now.
Yeah, it's not at the moment. And I have to tell you, I'm writing a book at the moment. You know, I mentioned that before. And it's hopefully going to come out in the next week or two. And I'll make sure you have it. But it's essentially a story of not only what I have done over the last 4 years. I do a lot of community work, a lot of pro bono work, not only helping my clients, but what does the community need? How can we get immigration lawyers to the community where it's not going to cost the community a lot of money? So I've been able to start some new initiatives to be able to help that. But I highlight lawyers who have done work outside of their day-to-day jobs to help the community as well in different areas, not just immigration. And it's called Legal Heroes in the Trump Era. And the book comes out, yeah, thank you. The book comes out hopefully September 29.
Oh, okay.
And it's really a story of how lawyers have had to step up as the government has created all of these obstacles for us. And I hope your listeners will buy the book. It will be 99 cents the day it's released. And I hope your listeners will read the book and maybe comment on what they feel, because I think everybody feels we need to do something. It's a time when we all have to do something. Yeah, I tell you some of the things that I've done. Essentially, Immigration has been very challenging.
Right.
And what I found is my day job is essentially helping businesses get visas on for their own businesses, getting visas for themselves if they're opening
Right.
businesses,
Right.
or H-1Bs, Ls, and Es, and EB-5s, but also musicians. And as somebody who teaches music, you might appreciate this. A lot of people come here for tours and teaching and competitions, and I often get them P3 visas, whether they're
Right.
dancers or singers. But what I don't do is help people go to court. I used to, and I started to make sure that I come out of that particular area, particularly after I had children. But what this administration did is essentially arrest people more and more and more. It's the enforcement of laws have become heightened. Who's going to help them? And so I created a nonprofit with some friends,
Uh-huh.
essentially training non-immigration lawyers to go into immigration court to
Mm.
help people who need help. And so that is called Washington Immigrant Defense Network, WIDEN. It's a nonprofit,
Mm-hmm.
and essentially helping people get the help they need in their trials. But I think what you might be referring to on the aviation part is I helped create with some friends again something called airportlawyer.org.
Oh.
And what that did, we talked about the Muslim ban, and immediately thereafter, and I talk about this in my book, when this order was signed, it didn't come with any notice. We didn't know it would come, and we didn't know it would be effective immediately. And so what that meant was there was a global chaos.
Yeah.
Instantly. It didn't matter which country you were in, you couldn't board your plane.
Yeah.
If you were on the plane, you were immediately banned while you were in the air. And if you landed here, you couldn't get off the plane. Some people were sent back. And so there was immediate chaos around the United States, but around the world. And so those people needed lawyers' help, legal
Mm.
help
Mm.
when they got off their plane. So Airport Lawyer, people came together, we became a team. And again, this is all explained in my book. And we created Airport Lawyer that allowed passengers to contact us, and volunteer lawyers would connect with them at whichever airport they were at in America.
That's
And
awesome.
those two big things really, really helped in those critical moments.
Okay.
It's been a if 4 years feels like 10, essentially.
Right. The other question was, do you have to have a particular mindset to become a lawyer? Because I've seen kids who argue with their parents that, hey, you'll make a good lawyer. So is there a particular mindset you need to be a attorney or a lawyer?
That's a really good question. And I would love your listeners to read the book, because my co-founder from Airport Lawyer talks about that. But before I answer that question, I will also say that my book was based upon a lot of interviews for my podcast. I didn't really set out to do a book. But as I was doing the podcast interviews, it occurred to me that all of these interviews need to be in one spot. And so that interview for the lawyer who helped me with Airport Lawyer is well worth listening to, about how one becomes a lawyer. And the answer is yes and no. It is true, a lot of people who have not necessarily argumentative state of mind, but they don't take no for an answer. They do become lawyers, and they do have that mindset. But honestly, if you have critical thinking, an analytical mindset, you can become a lawyer too, because not everybody goes to court. A lot of people who are, doing real estate transactions, for example, or patent law, for example, they are just analyzing documents with legal analysis. And so my answer is, what calls you? you know, people use the law in many different ways. People who are lawyers often are in public interest law because you are a humanitarian. You really want to help that person in crisis. You're a nonprofit helping them with housing law, particularly now. 40 million plus Americans are out of jobs, and we have a critical housing problem where people are facing eviction. You know, law can be anything you want it to be. Frankly, you pick your passion, and you could probably find a legal avenue in which to help. So you can become a lawyer no matter what. It's just, you know, it's a long path, and sometimes people don't have that patience.
Right. Now, switching topics. So you and I have, stood in line. We've done everything right, and we've got our citizenships or whatever. And some of us are still in line. Does it seem unfair that people in the southern border, when they come in and want to become citizens overnight or being given a permanent residence overnight, does it evoke a feeling of unfairness?
You know, that's a really good question. And I have to say that does come up often when this issue is debated. And it happens with one immigrant group against another immigrant group.
Hmm.
And the answer is no, it's not unfair. Because, first of all, nobody has it easy. Nobody's coming from the southern border and getting anything. The arguments that come up from particularly the Indian community, because there's a very long waiting line to get a green card. And it is inherently unfair. There's no question about it. So that the unfairness from that is you're here, you're contributing, making immense, invaluable contributions, just like I mentioned, but you're not getting the security that you should. And the children grow up, and then we have to find, a visa category for the children. It is inherently unfair. But for those people, I say we need immigration reform. When immigration laws were created in the 1950s and 60s, the world has changed a zillion times over. You know, the needs of the world have changed, the technology has changed, the face of immigration has changed. The laws need to change to keep up with it, but we're not getting that. What we need are more visas in general, and we need a way to grandfather everybody in. It's a different system, a different solution for them to the asylum seekers who are coming, who are being persecuted for their lives. You know, they have a life and death, literally a life and death situation. They are crossing for months and months and months with little babies attached to them, often dying or even being abused as they get here, having sort of been abused and tortured in their own countries. And this particular administration is taking away the rug from under their feet. And I talk about this in my book too, that the Human Rights Convention that protects people who are fleeing torturous situations, that Human Rights Convention is not being abided by. And so the answer is it's not unfair, because the immigration laws that we have already take into account all these categories, and everybody has a room in it. The trouble is the room has shrunk, and that immigration system needs to be completely changed. And when these notions, some of the myths I will tell you, is nobody's getting anything for free. So when immigrants come here, whether they are legal or illegal, nobody gets a handout. You cannot simply go to Social Security and say, I need this. They don't get that unless there are very narrow circumstances. But even to get asylum these days, this particular administration has made it such that nobody is getting asylum. These cases are taking years and years, just like the particular Chinese community, Filipino community, Mexican community, and Indian community. They have very long lines. Everybody's in this situation. Nobody is seeing their cases move, but the humanitarian causes are not seeing anything. If you think about the refugee category, this administration hasn't taken any. They have closed the doors. And if you think about the way the refugee system works, they have to go through years and years and years, literally, of vetting before they can get to the doors opening to them. And just as the doors had opened to come to the US, bam, this administration closed it. So unfortunately, it's unfair for everybody. And what we need is immigration reform. So the better argument that everybody can make is we need comprehensive immigration reform. You know, you cannot have a bill that is only going to address one little thing, even though it's a big thing. In the whole scheme of things, it's going to create problems elsewhere. So the ankle bone is connected to the knee bone, that's connected to the hip bone, and so forth. If you just take care of one little bone, the entire body is going to remain wonky, but wonky on a different way, on different sides. So comprehensive immigration reform is the utmost important thing of this moment in our times, because we need to address every aspect of it.
So, why is there no political will to get this moved? Is there a reason what you can think of?
You know, I think that's a very profound question. There is political will. The trouble is nobody can agree on where to meet the line. And so in 2012, the Obama administration had helped have an immigration bill that was passed in Senate. It was the first time a bill had passed on immigration for comprehensive immigration reform in decades. Nobody was happy, but it was a good compromise. And it was the closest we had come. When it came to the House, unfortunately, it never made it to the floor, because the Republicans are dead set against having a bill that would really have a compromise. Their compromise is give us the wall, make sure that all these undocumented people are out of the country. There's no path to citizenship for anybody. And they wanted border security, and they wanted, you know, some other things. And a House bill had all of those issues addressed in the House bill, but the Republicans never even paid attention. So the political will is there from the Democrats, absolutely 150%. It's the Republicans that really have not come to an agreement that even comes close to coming to the table. So the political will is there from one side, but you can't do anything with one side. We have a government that it should be bipartisan. And what we have seen, that this is not just on immigration though, it's happening on everything, whether it's healthcare or whether it's, you know, infrastructure. We have come to a point in this country where the lawmakers are not making law. They're just making a lot of noise to seem like they're working. It was a miracle that we got the PPP loan issues passed through Congress.
Yeah.
And even then, who knows what's going to happen?
Absolutely. During the time when the Obama administration did have majority in both houses, when the healthcare bill was passed, maybe they should tack this on too, the immigration bill.
I agree, but it's not that they didn't. They did prioritize healthcare over immigration at that moment. But healthcare is just as important as immigration.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not, yeah.
You know, I mean, it's lesser of the two evils. It's which baby do you keep alive? I mean, you can't, healthcare, because they made those changes and were able to pass, you know, pre-existing conditions and things like that. I mean, if you think about it, this pandemic that we're suffering through is really, you know, we're surviving it because we had some of those bills passed. So I agree with you, it should have been in the first term. But I don't know if what I would have done if I were in the shoes of that administration either. But as an immigration lawyer, I do feel like, was there more that could have been done? You know, I don't know. I mean, it's, I feel strongly that there should have been a bigger push. Maybe more executive action should have been taken. You know, the previous administration is not without fault either. You know, the Republicans don't talk about it, but Obama was dubbed as the deporter in chief.
Yeah, he
You know,
apparently deported
so
more people.
he did. So, you know, he didn't allow people to come here illegally, and this administration makes it sound like he did. And so it's a very interesting time in history, but I think that's a very fair question to ask. But politics is difficult. If
Yes,
we
it is.
had if we had people who are in the seats of making law really think about the people of the country and not just their own pockets and themselves and their self-interest, we probably would have seen a lot more that could have happened. But really, we do have a Republican Party that is really not thinking about people anymore. They're really thinking about themselves. And I think it's whether we're getting the tax break. And lo and behold, you know, this administration, when they passed a law, it was a tax break bill, you know. And so we are in challenging times. And what we need is we need new blood in our House of Congress, because we need younger generation
Yeah,
in
yeah.
lawmaker seats.
I
And so
agree with you.
it's very much a system that is not serving the people anymore. Because what we need is everybody who is able to vote must vote. And
Yeah.
if you cannot vote, you are an influencer. You, and I say this, you know, I started a pack in Washington State called the South Asian Pack,
Hmm.
trying to bring the South Asians together, because our voice is not being heard enough. Suddenly now, with Kamala Harris as the you know, vice president nominee, we do feel excited. But in the last 2 years in Washington State, at least, we've tried to get the South Asian community together more and more. And this voice is so important. But as you said, a lot of people are in the lines forever.
That's
It's,
that's the
you
the
know,
terrible part. And I do wish you were in the East Coast because we could do with a lot of uh, a pack here.
yeah, well, you know, I would be happy to talk to you offline about some of the things that you could start. But it's every one of us needs to do something.
Yeah,
We've come
yeah.
to a point in life where we really need to start figuring out how can we get our voices out there in a strategic manner. But you know, I think the community is coming together slowly, and we are rising depending on where you live. Just yesterday, I'm very proud to say that there was a grassroots effort between the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani community, and the Indian community, where we came together and had an event called Institutional Racism Through the Lens of Immigrants. And it was really well done. And I'll make sure you get the link.
Love to
Uh,
see it.
it's a basic 101 of what institutional racism is, because when you and I and other immigrants come to this country, we're either studying or we're getting into work. We're not necessarily learning about the historic pathways of how racism became racism today, and we only see it through our own eyes, but we don't necessarily figure out or understand what the bigger picture is. So we had the 101
Mm.
of institutional racism, and it goes hand in hand with everything that you and I talked about just now, you know. So I'll make sure you get the link so your listeners and viewers can learn a little bit about it, because there's so much we don't know. But if we do know, we can implement that in our day-to-day actions.
Yes, knowledge is power.
Very much.
Yeah. So please do send me those links, and also once your book is out, if I can have the first page or the the that I can put it out along with this podcast. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who'd be interested in buying it.
I'd be so grateful. Thank you.
And once again, thank you very much for finding the time to chat with
Nanda,
me today.
yeah, I'm so grateful, Nanda. Thank you for having me on my show. Please stay safe.
I will.
And I hope your teaching goes well. And I'd love to learn more about your teachings. You know, it's very close to my heart. I don't sing anymore, but, or not much, not publicly. Now I've become a bathroom singer. Yeah. Well, take care then, Nanda. Bye-bye.
Bye.